So in today's tutorial, we are looking at the knotty problem of pattern sizing, how to choose the right size for you and start that project off perfectly. Okay, so you've decided to have a go at dressmaking. You have picked a pattern in the shop, you have got some lovely fabric to make it up in, and you've got that lovely package home with you. Now, where do you go next? The very first thing that I would like you to do is think of the size you would normally buy in clothes in the shops, write it down on a bit of paper, and then totally throw it out the window. Make sure that all thoughts of your shop size are out of your head before you begin the process of sizing up your pattern. The key thing to do once all thoughts of shop size are dispelled is to take your measurements, and that is the main starting point of getting the right pattern size for you. So the start of any successful dressmaking project always relies on some accurate measurements being taken before you set off, before you size the pattern, before you cut into any fabric. The three key measurements that you will usually see on the back of your pattern packet are bust, waist and hip. You can sometimes also have a back length measurement as well, so that enables you to get a better fit along the back, whatever height you are. And we're going to run through how to take those measurements nice and accurately. And it's always a very good idea to do this process at the start of each dressmaking project. Body sizes do change over time, so even if you don't remeasure every time you make something, every 6 months or so is a good idea to make sure that you're updating your measurements as you go along. The first measurement that we're going to take together is our bust measurement. We take our tape measure round pretty much in line with where your bra strap would go, and bring your tape measure across the very fullest part of your bust. Now, when you're sizing up, make sure you're not breathing in, breathing out, doing anything not as normal as it could be with your body. Just have a nice relaxed posture and have your head up when you're taking your measurements. As soon as you put your chin down, you start to draw your shoulders in and your chest in, which can actually change the measurement a little bit. So keep your head up. Bring your tape measure round so that it's a snug fit, but not squeezing in anywhere. And then once you have the tape measure nicely in position, then look down to note down what measurement you have. Once you've taken your bust measurement, jot that down, and then what you're going to want is a waist measurement. Now, the waist measurement is sometimes a little higher than people would normally think. It's not down where your jeans are sitting, it's actually up at your true waist. And the easiest way to find the level of that is to just lean over to one side, and you will feel a little crease just digging in at the side of your waist, and you can lean the other way, see if you can find it over there as well. And it's where that little crease falls that you want to take your waist measurement. In dressmaking terms, that's what's called the true waist. So up at the true waist, you take the waist measurement. Again, the tape measure doesn't want to be squeezing anything in, and you don't want to be breathing anything in. That'll just cheat you out of fabric you might need later. And you want to have your head up again as well, not curving your body inwards looking down, but have your head up nice and straight. Position up the tape measure so you can feel it's nice and snug, and then look down and see what measurement you have. The hips is the final measurement that you'll normally see on the back of the packet. And just in the way that the waist is sometimes a little higher than people might think, the hip measurement is sometimes a little lower than people might think. So you're actually looking to ensure you've got the tape measure at the very, very widest part of the hips. So it's no good taking your hip measurement up here, because as you can see, there's a bit more room that I'm going to need behind here. You want to take your hip measurement right down And if you move the tape measure down and it's still needing more, getting bigger, then chances are you're trying to take your measurement too high. Keep moving that tape measure down until you can feel that it's not going to get any wider. It's actually starting to begin to get smaller again as you come towards the thighs. So taking that measurement, again, standing up nice and straight, and then looking down to see what measurement you have. So that's the bust, waist and hip measurement that we've taken. The final one that I mentioned earlier is the back length, and that can sometimes be quite useful if you know that you have a particularly long torso or a particularly short torso. You may need to make some adjustments to the back length of the pattern to bring it up or down accordingly. So to take your back length measurement, what you want to do is place your tape measure on just the little bone at the top of your vertebrae there, at the top of your backbone. You pop the tape measure there and you pull down with your hand to get the measurement that's right at that true waist. That's where the back measurement is measured down to. So at your true waist, which is the same level as that little crease we looked for earlier, pop your thumb on the tape measure, push it towards your back so you know you've got just the right place, and then you can let go of the other end, come round and have a little look at the tape measure where that's falling. So you then have your bust, waist, hips and your back length, and you are ready to start sizing up and looking at your pattern. Having those measurements is the best starting point you can get for any kind of dressmaking project, so make sure you take them and make sure you refresh them on a regular basis. Once you've got those measurements, you're going to want to look on the back of your pattern. So most patterns come with some pictures on the front, not always the best choice of fabric, that's entirely down to you, and actually a different choice of fabric can lead to a very desirable garment as opposed to sometimes watch pictures on the front. Now on the back of the packet you have your bust, waist and hip line and all the measurements that relate to those. You've got metric on one side and imperial on the other. So if you like to work in inches, go for that side. If you like to work in centimetres, go for the European size. And what you want to do is have a look through the different sizes along the bust line, along the waistline, along the hip line, to see which suits your measurements the best. Now the chances are you will not be the same size throughout. You will be moving from one size to another depending on your bust, your waist and your hip measurement. It's very rare that somebody actually sits just in one size. You will jump about, and it is absolutely fine on your pattern to move gradually between the lines from bust to waist to hip to get that perfect fit. The next thing to do, once you've had a look on the back of the pattern packet and you've got a rough idea of the size you might be wanting to cut, we're going to do a little bit more of an investigation. So having marked the size I might be on the back of the packet, so just looking at this particular packet here, and I've actually changed the pattern I'm using to be a dress that will show you bust, waist and hip measurements, because it just proves my point a little better. My measurements tell me that I'm going to be cutting a 16 on the bust, a 20 on the waist, and then back down to a 16 again on the hips. Now I want a bit more information than that, so I'm going to have a look at the pattern pieces themselves. So what I need to do is unfold the pattern, and this for some people is where it gets a little bit daunting, but don't worry, just unfold the pattern, and the piece that I'm looking for is the front of the dress, and pop it underneath the camera there for you. So what we've got here is our bust line, and down a little further we have our hip measurement, and there's a table of numbers at both of these points. and it has the sizes of the pattern running along here, and it then has in inches and centimetres what's called the made up measurements of the pattern. So looking across these and thinking about my body measurements, the made up measurement includes what's called ease, which is a little bit of extra fabric to make sure you can move around easily in whatever it is you're making. So looking first at the bust level, I know my bust measured up to be 95, and ideally what I want is at the bust level about 5 centimetres of ease, not too much more. I prefer to wear things a little more fitted, and I do find that what's normally built into patterns is actually a little bit too much. To prove that, on here we've got the ease above body measurements being approximately 4 inches or 10 centimetres. Now in my opinion that's going to leave you swimming in whatever it is you're making up. So that's why it's always best to find these measurements and just compare them to how you like to wear your clothing. Now, some of this comes just over time. The more and more you make, the more and more you'll realise just how much ease you like in your garments. But as a rule of thumb, to start off with, you want about 5 centimetres on the bust, extra. So if my bust measurement is 95, I'm going to want around 100 on the bust. And according to this little table here, that gives me 14. So size 14, I'm going to be cutting across the bust here. If I then move down to the hip line, again, I want a little more ease at the hips, just to make sure that you can move around reasonably. 10 centimetres is still a little bit much for me. I normally want about kind of 7 or 8 centimetres. So with my hip measurement being 101, I'm looking down these sizes here. 7 centimetres above that is 108, and that puts me at cutting a size 14. So that goes in line with being the same size for bust and hips, but actually instead of the 16 that my body measurements have given me on the back of the packet, doing a little bit more investigation has actually led me to a size 14. So I've looked at the hip and I've also looked at the bust. I haven't yet looked at the waist. Now we have a waistline on this pattern, but what we haven't got is some made up measurements for the waistline. So that brings me quite nicely on to, if your pattern doesn't have made up measurements on it, you can still find out what the finished garment measurements will be. And that's something you can do by measuring up your pattern pieces. So for the waistline here, what I'm going to do is across the line that you've got marked there saying waistline, I am going to measure across the pattern piece itself. Now I've gone for a 14 at the bust and hips, but I know that I was looking at maybe a 20 for the waist. So I'm going to look at the 20 line, follow it down, and I'm going to measure across to the 20 line just to double check how much I have there round the waist. Now I know there's going to be 10 centimetres above body measurement, so chances are it's going to come up a little bit large for what I want it to be, and I may well drop down a size. But the way to check that is to measure up your pattern piece. So the way you do that is you measure across from the cutting line, and on this one, because we've got our centre front being placed on a fold, we're going to measure across to where that centre fold would be. So I've got there just about 31 centimetres. Again, 31. On the back pattern piece, it's not cut on a fold. So we're going to have a seam allowance here and a seam allowance here. And we're going to have that on both back pieces. So 2 seam allowances, that'll be 3 centimetres, 2 times 1.5. And on the other back piece, we're going to have 2 times 1.5, 3 centimetres. So that's a total of 6 centimetres to take away across the back here. So to go through that calculation, to work out the size, the made up measurement of the size 20 pattern piece, we measured across the front and got 31 centimetres for that pattern piece. And we measured across the back and also got 31 for that pattern piece. What we then need to do is work out what the made up measurement will be with these pattern pieces combined. So for the front, our 31, we times that by 2 because the pattern piece is cut on a fold and will be double that by the time it's cut out. It has a seam allowance on either side of 1.5. So 2 times 1.5 is 3, and that's the seam allowance we need to take away. So 62 minus 3 is 59. For the back pattern piece, again we have 31, and we times that by 2 because there will be 2 back pattern pieces. But this time we have a join down the centre. So instead of just 2 seam allowances, we have 4 seam allowances. So double the amount. 4 times 1.5 is going to be 6 centimetres seam allowance to take away. That gives us 56. Add these two together and that will give it the total circumference, the made up measurement of the waistline of size 20. So these two added together gives us 115 centimetres. Now that's much larger than we need, so it immediately tells me the size 20 isn't going to be quite right. My waist measurement was 86 centimetres. And even with a reasonable amount of ease, not the 10 that they put on the pattern, but maybe just 7, I'm still only going to need a pattern piece that comes up to be 93 centimetres in total. So I'm going to go through this process for the size 18 and for the size 16 to see which of these is going to give me a number that's near to 93. So having gone through the process of measuring up my pattern pieces according to the different size lines, what I've now decided on is that I'm going to be cutting a size 14 at the bust line, a size 14 at the hip line, and what I actually needed was not a size 20 but just a size 16 at the waistline. So having measured up, it then moves just one size out at the waist. So my size changes by 1 as I move from bust to waist to hip. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my pattern does that as well. So what I can do is marking up where I'm going to cut my pattern. There's my bust dart, and from just underneath my bust dart, I'm going to swing gently from the size 14 to the size 16 at the waist. And then where my size moves down one size at the hip line, I'm going to swing gently from the size 16 line back to the size 14 line at the hip. So what I've done is I've done a very gradual line between the different sizes just to make sure that I'm going to have a pattern that fits nicely, moving between the lines just gradually from a 14 to a 16 to a 14 again. And that's how to check the size on your pattern. Make sure you're starting with the right size of pattern, the right amount of ease, and how to move between size lines on your patterns. Don't be afraid to do that. That's the key to getting a really good fit and having garments that you'll be happy to wear once you've made them. Okay, so I'm hoping this little tutorial has helped you work out how to size your pattern, made you aware of some of the little pitfalls in terms of getting accurate measurements, picking the right size in the first place, and that tricky little character called ease that is only actually included in the made up measurements on the pattern and is something to look out for depending on the type of fit you'd like in your garments. And also, if you come across a pattern that hasn't got made up measurements on it, the valuable idea of measuring up those pattern pieces to be able to double check the pattern itself against your body measurements. So all of those things rolled into one. I hope you find them really useful, and I hope they lead to a lot more success in your dressmaking projects. Bye for now.